Hello, gardeners. It's Monday. You know what that means? It's another edition of your Gardening Week Live, the spot where we get together every week from all over the world to talk about gardening, get our questions answered, and just hang out with a bunch of gardeners. I'm Gardener Scott. It's great to be here today. Got a lot of good information to pass out to you and lots of information I know you'll be sharing with each other. It's so glad to be here on a Monday. And if you're joining on the replay, well, hang around for the next 90 minutes as we cover a lot of gardening information. It's always good to see everybody check in. Let's go ahead and get to a question right off the bat that Linda Wagner was asking. She's planning on doing some traveling and wondering about the compost pile. Can you just leave your compost pile alone if you're going to be gone for a while? There's two basic ideas behind composting, and I was just doing a lot of reading on this yesterday because I'm preparing a video talking about lazy composting. In other words, you don't worry too much about your pile. You just throw stuff in it. When it decomposes, it decomposes. Eventually, you'll get compost. That's also called cold composting. In other words, you don't have a pile that heats up to those really hot temperatures. Hot composting, the other part of it, is pretty labor intensive. You have to always monitor your pile. You're more focused on balancing the greens and the browns and getting that temperature up. You turn your pile, you're always adding water to it. That's great, and that's a way to get really quick compost. Doing hot composting, you can have a cubic yard of compost in a month or two with no problem. The lazy composting, the cold composting, it might take a year to get the same amount of compost. A lot of it depends on how you want to do it, how much labor you want to spend, how much material you have. Even with hot composting, if you leave for a period of time, the pile should take care of itself. With a cold composting system, by all means, you can leave and not come back to it, and it'll probably be where it was when you left. So, different philosophies. In my new garden, I don't have a lot of material, at least over the last year. So, I practiced a cold composting system because I just didn't have the material to develop the volume. You need a lot of volume to get the bacteria working and to get those really hot temperatures. So if you don't have a lot of organic material and you don't have the time or the desire to spend a lot of time making compost using a hot system, then just throw it all into a pile and wait and let nature decompose. It takes a lot longer, but don't worry at all about just leaving for a period of time. The bacteria will have plenty to eat as long as you put the food in the pile. Dirty's Fun, good morning to you. Thank you so much for that super chat. Thank you as always for sharing your knowledge. I appreciate that. It's so good to have everybody here. I noticed a lot of discussion going on. Joseph is saying in Euless, Texas, it dropped to 39 degrees last night. That's 39 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 4 degrees Celsius. And for you, yeah, it sounds like fall has probably hit. For a lot of the rest of us, fall has been around. We've already had the frosts and the freezes. I've seen some of you talking about severe winds, tornadoes. We actually had a few days back some sustained winds over 50 miles per hour and gusts above that. I mulch, as some of you probably know from watching the videos, I mulch in fall with a mix of straw and crushed leaves. Mixed together, it works pretty well to stay in place. But our winds were so severe over this last week that yesterday I was back out in the garden replacing that mulch because it appears to be about 50 miles per hour is the limit before some of that material starts blowing away. And a lot of my mulch on my prepared vegetable beds has blown away over the last couple of days. So it's crazy weather we're having in this. At the same time, though, I'm having record-setting temperatures occasionally. This next week is going to be 10 to 15 degrees Fahrenheit above average. So it's just crazy everywhere. And I definitely feel your pain for those of you that are starting to encounter your first frosts and freezes, and also those of you that have gardens blowing away and plants being ripped out and all the rest. So that's one of the reasons I think gardeners are so great, because we're so resilient, because all of the forces seem to be acting against us in our gardens. But hang in there, and hopefully it'll all work out and be good. So good discussions. Also going back, I can see you all are talking about a lot of what's going on in compost and carbon and greens and all of that kind of stuff. So keep it up, keep learning, keep sharing your experience, because that is really what makes a big difference. The Mrs. Marvel is saying the fluctuations are bothersome, and she lives down in the southwest portion of the United States, where temperatures can be extreme and the conditions also extreme. So hang in there. It's always good to just keep hanging out, learn more, keep doing it, and eventually you have those little successes, like I always say, and that's what makes it all worthwhile. So Carolyn is asking, what's my opinion of those black compost bins that are tumblers? I've used a number of different tumbler systems. At the school garden, I actually was composting using 5 different methods to try to decide which I preferred. I'm not a big fan of the black tumblers. Now, most of it really comes down to how big they are. Gets back to that discussion about the cold and hot compost. To really decompose this organic matter, you need a big volume. The volume generates a lot of bacterial action. That bacterial action generates the heat, which promotes the thermophilic bacteria, which really chomps down and makes all that material decompose quickly. Well, some of those black plastic tumblers are pretty small. They might only hold 10 or 15 gallons of material, and you're supposed to fill them and roll them around. It's just not enough mass to generate that quick reaction. So if you don't have a lot of material to compost, those tumblers can be okay. They're really good at holding in moisture. So an environment like mine that's very dry, the plastic systems, you can put your material in, add some water, and essentially walk away, turn it every now and then just to aerate it, but it still takes a very long time to decompose. I also had a big metal tumbler that held about 2 cubic yards of material. It was so big that it was difficult filling it with enough material. That's one of those things, again, with those tumbler systems. You just put everything into it and then occasionally turn it and let it decompose. And depending on the size and the volume, it depends on how long it breaks down. I like a hands-on approach. I like earthworms and beetles and all those other insects getting involved with the composting process as well. So when you use those plastic tumblers or any type of fully enclosed system, you're not going to have earthworms. You're not going to have those organisms. You're really limiting the decomposition to bacteria. And I think it's important to have bacteria and fungi and everything else working together. So I prefer an open pile out in nature as opposed to those closed systems. Patrick, a beautiful day in Trinidad, Colorado. Leaf mulch is now blown somewhere into New Mexico. Yeah, the same wind that we all had along the front range. I love using leaf mulch and my straw mulch and all the rest. And most of the time it's great, but it can blow away when we have our mountain winds coming. This is a good argument for using wood chips as a mulch in the fall in an environment like ours that is so windy. I tend to stay away from wood chips in my vegetable garden because I really don't want any of those wood chips finding their way into the soil, because then they can generate a reduction in nitrogen, and that nitrogen depletion around those wood chips can influence how well the plants do when I put them in spring. So I tend to avoid wood chips in my vegetable garden beds. But when you've got extreme situations like the wind that I know a lot of you have been talking about in other areas besides Colorado, sometimes wood chips might be a solution in the fall and winter. And all you do is just rake all those wood chips aside when it actually comes time to plant in the spring. So I'm going to be doing a little more experimenting of that on my own because I've pretty much been a straw and leaf and dried grass person for my gardening career. And this year I'm going to start, at least in one of my vegetable garden beds, I'm going to put in some wood chips this winter, well, this year, and then next year as we go into the spring, I'll see if I have as many problems as I suspect I could have. And it might not be an issue at all. The back to Eden gardening method is gardening in wood chips. So I'm going to be doing a little more experimenting on that, partly because of the winds. So Dwayne is asking, can you grow smaller tomato plants indoors? Sure, you can. A determinate tomato, like a patio pot type tomato, might be ideal. The biggest issue with growing plants indoors, like tomatoes and peppers and squashes and all the rest, is giving them enough room to grow. So even a smaller tomato plant is still going to have a pretty substantial root system. So you should plan at least a 5-gallon bucket size for the roots. And you need to ensure that it has enough light because these are plants that are growing in the middle of our summers, and the more light, the better. So you see a minimum of 6 hours of sunlight is what plants need in summer. Well, plants like tomatoes really do better with more light. So you can set them up indoors, but you really should ensure they have at least 10 to 12 hours of light in that indoor setting. And it should be warmer than most households. So a household tends to be somewhere in the 70-degree Fahrenheit, 21 degrees Celsius range. That's okay for tomatoes, but they'll do better if they have a daytime with light temperature that approaches 10 degrees above that. So if you can supply heat and light and the root growth, then by all means you can grow tomatoes indoors. There are greenhouses all over the world that are growing tomatoes indoors, but they're controlling the amount of light and the size of the roots, usually in a 5-gallon bucket, and they have a very warm environment. But it's definitely worth a try. And so Dwayne is also asking, is east-facing light sufficient for indoor plants? It all depends on the plants. I've got some house plants that aren't even close to a window, and they do fine because they're low light plants. If you have plants that require more sun, then an east-facing window is probably not enough in the summer because the days are shorter, the sun is rising much further south, and so you're just not getting as much light. But it depends on the plant. If you have a low light plant, then yeah, east-facing window might be enough. But if you have a plant that requires more light, I've had a lot of problem trying to grow citrus plants, citrus trees indoors for that reason. My east and west facing windows just don't give those plants enough light. So think about the plant, do a little research, look it up to see how much light it requires, and you might have enough. It all depends. And Heidi's adding in, I think if the lighting is good and you can manually pollinate them, then it should work. Yeah, that's a good point, Heidi. So tomatoes are self-pollinating. They're a perfect flower with both the male and the female parts within the same flower. But they need some way for the pollen to mix. It could be as simple as just putting a fan in the room when the tomatoes are in flower, and as long as the plants are lightly moving, that's often enough to pollinate the flowers. You can also shake the tomato plants. They do that a lot in greenhouses. That's what I did in the Galileo greenhouse, occasionally just shaking the plant, and that was enough to pollinate the flowers. If you just leave your tomato plants alone when you're growing indoors, you have less likelihood that they're going to pollinate. In fact, they might not pollinate at all. Carolyn Medina, thank you for that super chat. I appreciate that. It's so good to see you back. Myra's asking the question, I'm going to plant all fruit trees this weekend. Weather's finally less hot in Southern California. That's awesome. I actually have started looking at fruit trees again. Going to be doing some pruning here another couple of months. You know me, I'm always thinking about the videos I'm going to be doing. So yesterday I was out looking at my espalier apple tree and thinking about that video, looking at the other fruit trees and thinking about pruning, because I watered all of my trees yesterday. And that's one of the things I wanted to talk about today was winter watering. So my nighttime temperatures are now regularly dropping at or below freezing. Now, next couple days, because of this weird warm weather, we finally have a few days where the nighttime temperatures are above freezing. But it's been warm during the day and cold at night. Because of the really severe freeze that we've had a couple times now, all of the leaves are dead and dried. Most of them have fallen off my fruit trees. Don't get lulled into this false sense of security where, okay, the leaves are gone, the trees are dormant, now I can sit back and wait for spring. A lot of these plants, the perennials, the fruit trees, the fruit shrubs, they're still growing. They're still actively alive. And so you look out in your garden and you see all these dried leaves that are blowing around in the wind, and you think the plants are dormant, I don't need to water them. That's exactly the opposite of what you should be doing. This time of year, these fruit trees that I have should not be allowed to dry out. They still have a lot of that really small root growth. And if I don't water, those small roots are going to die. And so by not watering, I've essentially lost 2 or 3 months of root growth because I'm allowing those roots to dry out and die. By keeping them watered now, I'm allowing those small roots to grow some more, to harden off and go dormant at their pace, not my self-imposed. And so a lot of gardeners, at least in an area like mine that's dry and has harsh winters, in the spring, I remember at the Master Gardener Help Desk, people coming in and saying, my fruit trees died. What happened? Well, it turns out they stopped watering the trees in fall and they didn't water again until the spring. The same with perennials, the same with all these plants that are going to keep coming back. You've got to water them in fall, especially when we've got the warm days and the cold nights, and the warm days and the cold nights. When we go into winter and it's cold days and cold nights, then yes, you can back off on the watering because the ground is going to be frozen for many of us. The roots are going to be cold and have gone dormant. The whole plant will have stopped transpiration and it's just waiting for the spring to come. But even then, you don't want those roots to desiccate. In winter, when things start warming back up again and you have daytime temperatures above 40 degrees Fahrenheit, that's about 4.5 Celsius, you need to start thinking again about watering the plants. That's to make sure that when they perk up, when they're still growing in the fall or when they start growing in the spring, you may not see that growth, but that growth is going to start at the soil level and just below it and just above it. And the soil needs to be moist so that those roots can start getting the growth happening again, sending that moisture back up through the plant to generate the new leaves and the new growth. So start thinking about your winter gardening now because you have to have a plan. One of the hardest things about winter gardening is dragging the hose out and watering, because if you're anything like me, you've got the hose out, you disconnect it because you know it's going to be freezing at night, then you hook it up to go water the plants. Well, all the water that was in the hose is now frozen and you have to wait for it to thaw out, and it might not thaw out. So start thinking about how you're going to water your garden when you don't have a hose or when you have a frozen hose. So I have a 2-gallon watering can, and in winter, when we have some really warm days, I'll go out with my watering can and water a lot of my plants. It takes time. I'll do it over a period of days, usually a little bit this day, a little bit tomorrow, but you got to keep your plants watered. Lawns are another great example of this. A lot of growth or a lot of new growth doesn't happen in the spring because of winter kill, because people don't think about their grass as a plant and it needs to be watered during the winter. So if you don't have a lot of snow or you don't have the fall and spring rains, you got to think about getting out there and watering your plants when it gets cold out. So Danielle is asking, have I ever overwintered stevia? Is it normal for the stem to turn brown when it's in dormancy? How do I know the difference between dormant and dead? I have not overwintered stevia, but a lot of plants have a life cycle. And it gets back to that sunlight. So when they have less sun and when the temperatures start to fall and they start to enter their dormant period, it's perfectly normal for the plants to turn brown. And so it comes down to the type of plant. If it's an herbaceous plant where it sends up new green growth every year, then the previous year's growth is going to turn brown and die during the dormant period. If it's an evergreen plant, then no, it shouldn't turn brown. So that's one way to look at it. It depends on the plant as far as whether it's herbaceous, and it should turn brown. A lot of perennial plants are herbaceous plants. Those flowers that we're growing, absolutely normal for them to turn brown, fall to the ground. We clean them up, and then they pop back up in the spring. One way to tell is you can get down into the soil a little bit. The stalk might be brown, the leaves might be brown. If you try to bend it, it's going to break because it is dead. But if you get down into the soil and look at the roots without disturbing them too much, you should still see that nice light pale color in the roots, and you should be able to tell that the roots are still alive even if the top of the plant isn't. Okay, let's see what else. Prepper Chris is here. Glad you made it as well. I noticed Heidi's comments. William is asking, when is the best time to prune fruit trees in 7A? And so the best time to prune fruit trees as far as the winter pruning goes is when the plant is completely dormant. And so in 7A, you're going to be warming up in the spring earlier than I would in my 5B garden. And so I typically say January and February in general is the best time for most of us to be pruning our fruit trees. I like to go out on a nice still day. The wind's not blowing. It's warm. It's still going to be cold at night, but I can get out and see the plant to do my pruning. And for me, that's typically early February. And so for you, I'll suggest late January. But you want to make sure the plant is dormant so you can get in there with all the leaves off and look at the structure. You want to prune out any dead branches, any diseased branches, any damaged branches, any branches that are interfering with other branches, and then also take a little time to think about the shape of the tree. And so that's why I was talking about, I was out yesterday thinking about that video to come, because now that most of the leaves have fallen off my fruit trees, I can see the structure and what I need to do the pruning next year in February. So I'll be doing a video on that as the time gets a little bit closer. But not a good idea to prune the trees while they're still actively growing right now in fall. PD is saying, I planted my garlic too early 2 weeks ago. Placed 1 inch of straw and 1 inch of shredded mulch on top. The weather warmed a little. Now I have a growth above ground. What should I do now? Just have patience. Go ahead. You might add some more mulch. It's not going to be terrible. That growth may continue to be there, especially with a good mulch on top. You may still see some of that growth through the winter, depending on how harsh your winters choose to be. Most likely, that growth is going to die off. Not a huge issue. You should have new growth in the spring. You'll still get bulb development. You'll still get a plant. Might not be as big as some of your other bulbs, because that plant has already taken some energy from the clove to start growing. But in most cases, it's not enough to actually kill the plant. It just might be a little bit stunted when it does start growing again in the spring. Rhonda's saying, this is my first year growing garlic and walking onions. Good for you. Those are the kind of plants that once you start growing them, you always grow them. I've been growing garlic for years and years and years because after that first time, it was just so great to harvest garlic and then do it all over again that I really enjoy it. I'm a little concerned. We were talking about wind earlier. Some of my garlic plant tags actually blew out of the ground. And most of the time, I'll have an individual garden bed plan and I'll show all of the rows and everything within that bed. But in my garlic bed, I just put the plant tags. And I'll have an entire row of one variety and another row of another variety. And I think I'm growing 10 different varieties in this particular bed. Some of those plant tags blew out in that big wind we had this week. And I really didn't know which rows were which. So I like to save some of my garlic each year to plant for the following season. And it's nice to know what the varieties are, but there's at least 2 or 3 varieties that I'm not going to be able to do that with. And so if I choose to grow them again, I'm probably going to have to buy some bulbs because the plant tags got mixed up when they blew away. I had a video with my grandkids making plant markers with rocks. I think I might have to make some rock plant markers for my garlic in the future and a lot of those other plants that I've got in the ground over the winter because I never even would have imagined that the plant tags would blow away, but chalk it up to new experiences, new lessons learned. You've got to be careful with those kind of things. And I think it was because of the mulch. The plant tags were actually probably in okay, but I had the mulch on top of my garlic and the wind whipped up that mulch to the point that it probably just knocked those tags out. So lesson learned, something new. I'll chalk that up to experience. Okay, so let's see. Sherazad's asking, how do you save leaves for the next year? I just save them in black plastic bags, and I think I've got 5 or 6 bags right now. And Frank Anselmo, I don't know if he's on the live chat right now, but next week I'm planning to go down to Pueblo, Colorado, and Frank and an organization down there does cleanup of leaves, and I'm hoping to get a whole bunch of leaves, a whole bunch of future organic material in my garden, future mulch, future compost, but all of those are going to be in plastic bags. And what I'll do is just bring them back to my garden and I'll leave them over the winter in the plastic bags. Now, that's when I want the leaves to be leaves that I'll be using as mulch. For leaves that I'm planning on making into leaf mold or to add to the compost pile, then I'll actually dump those out into a big pile. And that's how I essentially save them over the winter. But I'm really not saving them because I want them to begin decomposing. So if you're saving your leaves to use and you want them to retain their leaf shape and the dryness of the leaf, put them in buckets or put them in bags. If you are saving the leaves with the intent to decompose, I just expose them to the weather so they can go ahead and start breaking down right away. Okay, always so good to see this. Pepper Chris, PD, Bettina, Trudy's fun. Everyone's talking back and forth. That's so awesome. Good old dude is saying, hi, can any supplement be added to a cold mulch bed to speed up the decomposition? Yes and no. And so it gets to the balance of the nitrogen and the carbon. And so typically, and I think this is what you're asking, typically the reason a pile will slow down is because it gets out of balance and it's high in carbon. And so what it needs is a nitrogen boost to get it kick-started again. And as far as that's concerned, it really doesn't matter what the source of carbon is. It could be green grass, it could be kitchen scraps, it could be coffee grounds, or it could be a high nitrogen fertilizer. So as long as you're introducing nitrogen into a cold pile, and it's cold because it's got a carbon excess, no, it really doesn't matter. It's just a question of whether you want to use organic materials or whether you want to use some type of organic or inorganic or artificial fertilizer. It's totally up to you, but you just need to get a boost of nitrogen back into the pile, and that should work fine. And depending on how fast you want that boost, may determine whether you use a liquid nitrogen source, which should have the nitrogen available right away, or whether you use like an inorganic nitrogen, which is more slow release. So nitrogen is nitrogen. It's really, that's the way it works as far as the bacteria is concerned. And it's the bacteria that's going to be breaking down that organic matter in the soil. Yeah, Heidi's saying try blood meal. I use blood meal a lot in my potting mixes. It's not something I often add to my compost pile just because I have other options. But yes, blood meal is a great organic source for nitrogen. And that's one of those that can give a real quick boost to your pile as well. Let's see, Julie is saying, my geese and turkeys stroll along and pluck my ID labels off. It's their favorite pastime. That's funny. I hadn't thought about that as well. If you have an animal of some type and you've got plant tags, you have to consider what they're going to be doing, and you might lose your plant tags. Yet another reason to make plant tags out of stones, because not only are they less likely to blow away, but it's less likely that animals are going to be plucking them off the ground. Okay, let's see what else I want to talk. I want to talk to this week a little bit about gardening during the holidays. The holidays are fast approaching. Different holidays for different people in different parts of the world, but this is a time of year that most of us celebrate some type of holiday. And with the weather changing, either in the north it's getting colder or in the south it's getting warmer, we're looking at our garden a little bit differently than we have in recent months. So what do you do during the holidays? As Linda was asking earlier, she's planning on traveling. There's a lot of traveling that takes place over the holidays. Most of us in the northern hemisphere where our plants are dormant don't have to worry that much about watering for days or a week or two during the holidays. But if you're going to be gone for an extended period of time, you might need to think about watering your plants. I'm talking about the outdoor plants based on the winter watering I was just talking about. You definitely have to think about watering your indoor plants. So what's your plan? Who's going to water your plants while you're away if you're traveling over the holidays? Another concern when it comes to gardening over the holidays is the fact that we're not gardening over the holidays. We've been working so hard and now things are finally quieted down. We've got our beds cleaned up. The plants are starting to go dormant, and we just want to sit back and enjoy the family, enjoy the food, enjoy the holidays. And so now gardening kind of gets off your mind. Well, this is one of those things that I suggest that you go ahead and keep it on your mind. And let me go ahead and point out Carla. She's here every week. It's nice to be able to use our dried garden produce in holiday cooking. Yeah, absolutely. And that wasn't something I was going to talk about, but it ties in exactly with what I wanted to talk about. Try to bring your holidays and gardening together again. And I love that idea for the holiday cooking. I've mentioned before where I love going out and harvesting those cold weather plants like spinach to use in some of my holiday dinners. I encourage you to think about that. I have been saving and drying my herbs. I always try to make it a point to use my own dried herbs in my holiday cooking. I always try to have some of the conversation when friends and family are together where we talk a little bit about the past year. And of course, my year revolves a lot about gardening, so I share gardening one way or another. I also use this time for a lot of garden planning because typically with the holidays, you'll have some extra time on your hands. If you're working, you've got some days off. If you're not working, you're not in the garden, you've got extra time. Start thinking about using holiday time as the gardening time. Instead of you going out into the garden for 30 minutes a day or an hour a day like you might have during the summer, use that same 30 or 60 minutes and watch videos on YouTube, or read a book, or do some other activity. Get your garden journal updated. Still spend that time that you were out in the garden, but now you have to be inside because of the weather. Spend that time still doing gardening related activities. And I think this is really important, especially for new gardeners, because it's really easy to get excited about the gardening season when plants are actively growing. But now the holidays come, you got so much else on your mind. When the season starts changing and things start warming up again, well, you haven't been thinking about gardening for months, and you're definitely behind the curve to get your garden started for next year. So don't fall behind. Keep up with it. Keep learning. Keep documenting. Keep thinking and keep planning your garden. And it's an ideal time over the holidays. And I think a lot of people don't do this, and I know they aren't. The viewership on gardening channels just plummets at this time of year because people aren't thinking about gardening. I say go ahead and think about gardening. So as we move into holidays, keep doing it, even if you're not outside, and it'll still keep that gardening mindset fresh. I just think that's also something that we should always do. Nachi G says, I also look for gardening tools in clearance and catch up with books and videos. That's a great idea. There's a lot of clearance specials. There are a lot of bargains that can be had at this time of year. So absolutely great suggestion. Whatever it takes, just keep doing it. Keep active. Keep after it. I just one of those things that I think if like most things in our lives, we stop doing them, then we forget that we should be doing them, and then we don't do them. And I just think gardening is too important to fall into that trap. So I'm going to keep doing my gardening over the winter, partly by doing this every Monday. So I think that's one of those ways that you can do it. Colin is saying, howdy from Lower Normandy. I love France, and I hope to get back to that area. I haven't spent a lot of time. I visited Normandy, but awesome. So glad that you're here. The garden is still an inspiration. Asian hornets doing the pollination here right now in Zone 8B. That's awesome. And that's an interesting point. Thank you for sharing that. We often think of pollinators as bees and butterflies, but there are so many other insects and animals that are pollinators that we should welcome to our garden. And so hornets are one of those things that many of us think of hornets as being a terrible thing that we have to eradicate because we don't want them to sting us. But they have a role to play in the garden. And I really appreciate you sharing that, because not only that you're enjoying your garden and you're still having some growth in Zone 8, but also because you can show that hornets really do play a role. So that's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think that's incredible. Let's see. So Tamara's saying, I have an apple tree that had the rootstock grow into a 15-foot tree. It was cut down. Can I graft that apple tree scion wood to the branches of the rootstock? Yeah, you absolutely can. I'm hoping to actually do some grafting videos in the future. And so one of the things that I was doing when I was looking at my fruit trees yesterday was looking for the growth. And so if you've got the new growth coming from below the graft point, then that will grow into a future tree with that particular type of rootstock. If you save part of the tree from above the graft point, then that will be whatever the fruit is that you were trying to grow. And you can definitely cut off some of that growth, some of those branches, and graft them together. So if you take a scion from the top part, let's say it's a Jonathan apple, and you either graft it onto the tree below that graft point, or like I'm planning on doing, taking a cutting from some of that side growth from the bottom. I'm going to be growing in two separate ways. I'm going to be taking some of those cuttings from below the graft, rooting them, and hopefully getting a small tree. Then I'm going to be taking some of that growth from above the graft point, rooting them, growing them, and getting a small tree. And then I'll be cutting and grafting the scion onto the rootstock. And you can definitely do that as long as the points match and you can get a good graft that takes, by all means. Yeah, that's definitely something that you can do. When you have an older rootstock, if you're trying to graft a new scion into or onto an older tree's rootstock, it's a little more challenging just because the sizes may not match. And I know there's some videos out there that talk about that. But yes, I wish you luck. Go for it. Okay, let's see what else we have popping up here. A lot of good stuff. Luciano is saying my ecosystem is coming together. That's awesome. I always encourage that you develop your ecosystem, and that's everything. Like just talking about the hornets. That's the birds, it's the insects, that's the soil organisms, it's the plants, it's the whole thing. So so glad that you're putting all that together, Luciano. That's awesome. Chris is asking, any tips for stumps? And I know we talked a couple weeks back about what the trees you lost or tree you lost in your garden. I actually leave a lot of my stumps in place because I have grand visions at some point for my grandkids. I want to create a fairy garden. And so depending on the size of your stump, you can actually make a little fairy garden for the kids around it. And you can turn the stump by doing some very strategic cutting and pasting. You can put little doors and windows on the stump, and then you put little plants around it, and you've created a fairy garden for the kids. So that's one of the things I'm planning on doing with the big stump I have in the front. I also use stumps as places to sit. And so depending on where the stumps are, you might be able to leave them in place. But I've dug up stumps and moved them to other areas in my garden as little benches or little stools so that you can have a place to sit. And you'll be seeing this. I've already put some of those in place in the area where I'll be growing my pollinator flowers and my wildflowers. I've got a couple stumps like that. In fact, you can actually see me sitting on one. I did a video last month talking about sowing the flower seeds in fall. I'm sitting on a stump in that area of the garden that I moved to make it an area to sit. At some point, I'll be surrounded by flowers and it'll be a nice place to spend. So there's a couple options. You can also use it as just a decorative element. And I've done that before where it's kind of like a trellis. So you'll put a stump and you can grow vining plants up at clematis. I'm doing that in my front yard around that stump where I'll be doing some fairy garden stuff. I'll train a clematis up the stump and I'll put some extenders on it. So the flowers of the clematis will completely cover the stump and you won't even know that there's a stump there. So those are a couple ideas. I hope that helps. Okay. Joe Black, first time here live. I feel like people ask silly questions just for attention often. I don't like to think of any questions as silly. There are some questions that are asked every single week. So welcome to the channel. Glad you made it here live. And this is my reminder as well for all of you that you can look back on my live streams and I've got timestamps for all the topics that we talk about during the live stream. So if you look back, you can do a real quick search to see what we talk about. If you do that, you'll see lots of the same questions that come up almost every week. I don't think of them as silly. I just know that we have a lot of levels of gardeners here, some very brand new gardeners that really, honestly, to them, it's not a silly question. It's information they want to know. And for the rest of us, for me in particular, I've got no problem answering the questions. So keep asking your questions. there's a lot more people watching than are actually involved with the comments, asking questions or not. I do hope you throw your questions out if there's anything. Hopefully I'll get to it, but of course I can't always get to the things that we have, because we always have questions, and that's how we become better gardeners, is by getting our questions answered. I would not have thought most of my questions over the time I've been learning were unnecessary if I didn't ask them. So ask your questions. Don't worry about it. Okay. John Ann, thank you for that. Welcome. It's a great group, and Gardener Scott's amazing. I appreciate that. And welcome to all the rest of you who might be new. So if you are new, if this is your first time, let me know in the comments. Go ahead and just type in new or I'm new, just so we can see that you're joining in for the first time. You'll get a great welcome from everybody that's here. A lot of the people that are active in the chat have been here for weeks, and we've been doing this for months now. It's always nice to welcome the new people and hope that you come back every week. And if you can't be here live, then you can watch it on replay, because the information pretty much holds true. Gardening information is gardening information. And whether I talk about it this week or next week, or you watch it this week or months from now, it's gonna, for the most part, be the same. Now, it changes. I had a question a week or two ago that I responded to on Master Gardeners. And the question was about if the information changes. Well, gardening information does change. If you go back to gardening books from 10, 20, 50 years ago, there's a lot of information in those gardening books that we no longer follow. As we find new and improved ways of gardening, we're going to garden the new and improved way. And so I went through the Master Gardener program back in 2004, and some of that information, now this is all university research-based information that I was taught back then, some of that information has changed. So always be open to learning new things, maybe even modifying how you garden as new information comes out. And that's one reason why I read blogs and read books and watch videos, because I'm always trying to learn the new things that are coming out that can modify how I'm doing it. And I have no doubt next year, 5 years from now, I'll be gardening differently than I'm gardening right now. So it's just one of those things. Keep on growing, keep on learning, and it's the kind of thing that'll make you a better gardener, which is what we're all about. And yeah, Joe says, been watching for 2 years. I know you've commented occasionally on the videos, and that's one of those things. About 2 years ago is when I actively started making videos every single week. So Joe, thanks for being part of it this whole time, because even though I've got older videos in that, it's been about 2 years that I've been serious. So you've been following along. That's incredible. Thanks. So awesome. And Danielle says, I do the same thing. Love listening to lives and gardening videos while gardening and cleaning. And this gets back to that idea that I was talking about, how you can garden over the holidays. Just keep watching videos. I'll have some more to come this week and more to come next week, and so are many of the others. Now, many of the gardening video creators are kind of pulling back a little bit. And so I've noticed a lot of people that were doing 2 or 3 or more videos a week in the summer have pulled back to about 1 a week. And I've pulled back to 2 a week. During the holiday weeks, I'll probably pull back to 1 a week. But at the beginning of the new year, I'm going to start cranking them out again, 3 videos a week. And as far as I'm concerned, January is still holiday season. So I'll have a lot of new material. I know a lot of others will have new material as well. So keep watching those videos. Keep listening to them in the garden. Okay, let's see. Joe Block says, self-sufficient me is a fun guy, but I don't think his videos help me much. They are kind of abstract. That's an interesting point. And I watch a lot of videos. Self-Sufficient Me just went over 1 million viewers recently. Great videos. I like watching his videos too. A lot of the basic information is good, but I tend to agree with you that it's a bit of a distraction, because even though the information is good, I can't grow most of the plants he's growing. He's had some really good videos of the top 5 things you should grow in your garden. And the 5 things he shows are 5 things that I can't grow in my garden because of my weather. But that's okay, because he's in Australia and he's making videos for Australians. It's just the rest of us have discovered it, which is why, for the most part, my videos are made for people in the northern hemisphere. But I do try to include information, add the Celsius temperatures to get other people from the world watching as well. So I do try to make my videos a little more inclusive. But even the videos, some of my favorite videos come from the UK, which is a completely different environment from mine. And I completely enjoy the videos, even when I don't learn much. But I do try to focus on those videos that are teaching me something that I can use. So during the holidays, seek out those other channels, and so you can start finding some of your favorites that really are beneficial for you, that you really do get something from. And that's a great way to grow. Some of the other very popular channels out there, yeah, I just don't watch them so much anymore. Some of them have turned from informational channels to vlog channels, and I'm not a big vlog viewer kind of guy. So I've modified the channels that I watch, but I'm always on the lookout for more channels. And if you come across some good channels, feel free to share them, which ones you enjoy. And that's a great way to get this community finding those videos that are best for you, because the videos that are best for me are not the videos that are best for you. And while I love Mark at Self-Sufficient Me, I can't use a lot of his information, and I instead will focus on others. Just you got to do what works best for you. And I appreciate you being here, but I know that there are people that have stopped watching my videos because I'm doing a lot more focus on new gardeners than I have in the past. And I know that I've lost some viewers that were more experienced gardeners, but we evolve. We just have to work and find what's best for us. So keep that coming. Yeah, Phil says, I totally agree about the vlog channels. But that's okay. You know, some of the biggest channels on YouTube in the world are vlog channels, and there are millions of people that get benefit from that. That's wonderful. I'm just not one of those people. Okay. Yeah, John Ann is saying, someone here suggested James Paglioni. He's also one of those. Grows in New Jersey, a different environment from mine, but great information and very energetic, easy to listen to. Styles completely different from mine, but great gardening channel. So thanks for sharing that, because there's a lot of good stuff out there. Okay, let's see. Carla's saying, we just need to convert the information to what is usable where we are located. As an example, Mark does many vids on soil amendment, something applicable to all locations. Yeah, absolutely, yeah, and that's what I watch. I watch a lot of his videos on how to garden in a raised bed, how to amend your soil, how to approach gardening, tools. You know, some of his videos aren't on tools, include tools that I've never even heard of and that aren't even available here in the States, but I can still gather the information that he's conveying. So yeah, I always try to find that little bit of kernel of helpful information for you, and that's a great way to keep moving forward. Okay, Heidi says, a good compost book is called Let It Rot. That is a good compost book. I should add that to my list. I don't have that on my list. In the descriptions, if you don't know, I do have a link to the bookshop where I've got a page that lists a lot of my favorite books. So occasionally I'm asked about my favorite books. I do have that link in the description below my videos and my live streams. Just yesterday, or actually on Saturday, my video was about teaming with microbes, a great soil book. There's one of those things that as we move forward in our gardening knowledge, you can approach it a number of different ways. And I know some of this is generational. I come from a generation where we read books and we have libraries. even if you're younger and you don't have a big library and you do most of your reading on an electronic device, you still should have some type of library. Whether it is an e-book or a hardcover book, there are so many good sources of information out there, because you can watch a 6-minute or 12-minute video on how to do something in the garden, but you really don't get a lot of that in-depth understanding that you can from a book. And so there are thousands of videos on how to compost, but they can't even begin to scratch the surface of what you'll learn from a book like Let It Rot. Or even like the book Teaming with Microbes has a chapter on compost. It's a short chapter, but that chapter alone gives way more information than you'll see in most of the composting videos out there. So great thing to do, in my opinion, is develop a library. Whether it's electronic or hard copy, develop a library and you will become a better gardener, because you'll just understand more about gardening. And one of the reasons why I think you should have it in book form is because you can go back and reference it. So you read it through the first time, you learn, you kind of remember what's in it. There's a whole bunch that you're going to forget. Well, then in the future, if you encounter something in your gardening journey that prompts the question, you can think, oh yeah, I read about that once in that book. And you go back to the book and you read it again, and it's right there as though you were reading it for the first time. And when I made that video on Teaming with Microbes, it's one of my favorite books. I refer to it often when I'm making a video about soil, and I still learn new things looking at it again, preparing for that video. So books are such an awesome thing, especially over the holidays, if you can add to your library. Okay, let's see what else we have. A lot of good conversation going back about different channels. Yeah, Dina is saying, what I like is you show basics. I'm in Arizona, so many things you show aren't what I need. However, I still could get info that spurs ideas. Thank you. And like I say, that's the way I like to do it. Yeah, there's a lot where I show how I do something. It's not going to match how you do it, but hopefully you can gain a little bit to modify it for your own environment. I know the Mrs. Marvel and I have talked back and forth through our comments. Same thing. Her environment is completely different from mine, but that's how you learn, is by asking those questions and modifying to fit your particular environment. Linda's saying, I'm on my second read of Teaming with Microbes. A friend suggested it in May. I love you talking about the play on words in your video. Thanks. You know, I actually bought the book, and it took me a while to figure out what the title really meant. And at first I thought, wow, they misspelled it, and then figured out that no, it was intentional. So it's really good. Okay, let's see. Laura's saying, watching these warm weather channels does make the grass look greener, but I need to practice gratitude for our area. We can grow strawberries well, and I love strawberries. I don't need dragon fruit. Absolutely. And, you know, that's one reason why I keep making the videos, because there's nobody else out there that's making videos, gardening videos, as I do from Colorado, in a garden that's at 7,500 feet, in a growing season that's about 130 days long, with regular days of winds in excess of 50 miles per hour, zone 5B, all the rest. No one else is making a bunch of videos from a garden like mine, because no one else has a garden like mine. And I'll watch a lot of the channels, you know this. Most of the gardening channels are in zone 7 or zone 8. They're still growing green, while some of us in zones 4 and 5 and 6 have brown gardens. They're still green. Yeah, I love watching those videos, if nothing else, just to see the green growth, which gets me enthusiastic about when my garden will be green again. So it's an interesting point. It is fun watching some of those videos just to see the green, but I don't need to grow dragon fruit or breadfruit or jackfruit or any of those others that aren't going to grow in my area, because they just won't. But I can still enjoy the green. There's a new channel that just started. Help me with this. It's the the Messy Garden, something like that. He's only got like 4 or 5 videos, and it's from someplace like New Zealand. Incredible, incredible videos. The content, he's a brand new gardener. It's kind of a follow along as I learn kind of channel, but the visuals are just incredible. He has some incredible skills with photography and editing, and that's one of those channels to just watch, just to enjoy seeing the scenery. You're probably not going to learn much in the videos, but it's just a feast for the eyes. And so, brand new channel, and it's something that I find comfort in seeing other people grow things that I can't grow. Okay, let's see what else we have popping up. The Weedy Garden. That's it. Yes. MG says the Weedy Garden. That is the channel I'm talking about. Just started recently, last couple months. He doesn't have many videos, and he doesn't release videos very often, but incredible, incredible visuals on those videos. So go ahead and check it out. I know that he's getting a lot of growth in subscribers just because the videos are so cool, and you can go there. You might pick up some new things, but it's just fantastic to watch. It really is fantastic to watch. So thanks, MG. I appreciate you popping that out. Yeah, there you go. It's a professional photographer who can't travel, indeed, in Oceania. So yeah, check it out. I'll give a little shout out to him. Hopefully that'll boost his viewership a little bit, but hopefully it'll give you some extra visuals when it's cold and snowy outside, and you can see his beautiful garden that will never see snow, and that's one of the wonderful things about it. Well, so let's see. Rob from Leicester says, Tony from Simplified Gardening shows up on this stream frequently. And that's Jay's comment. And so I did want to mention today, Tony isn't here. He's actually working today, but here's a secret for just you. We're planning to get together live next week on this channel at this time. So we've been talking about it. It's a surprise just for you, but come back next Wednesday and you should see Tony from Simplified Gardening on screen with me, and we'll answer some of your questions in tandem. So Tony's a great supporter of my channel. I'm a great supporter of his channel, and you'll be able to see him next week. So let's see. Joe's saying, wild, wonderful, off-grid. I watched 2 most amazing couple. I don't watch them regularly. They are a channel that's on my list. I have seen some of that, so thank you for throwing that out. Yes, I do agree. Luz is saying, come up with some good questions. So like we were talking about earlier, I think every question is a good question. But if you've got something that you think you'd like to see the viewpoint from a UK gardener and from a US gardener, yeah, come up with some of those questions, and maybe we can give our different perspectives next week. And I'll be looking for those kind of questions when that time comes. And thanks, Heidi. Yeah, I think it'll be great to see the 2 of us together again. I enjoyed doing that collaboration video that we did, and we chat occasionally. It's always good to have that information. I did also want to talk this week a little bit about tree pollinators. So I've already talked about watering the trees, fruit trees in particular, and beginning the ideas of pruning the fruit trees. Well, for those of you who already have fruit trees, maybe 1 or 2, and those of you that are thinking about getting fruit trees for this next season, and I do encourage that you add fruit trees to your garden. One of the most important factors when you choose your tree is whether it needs a pollinator or not. Now, apple trees need pollinators. Every single apple tree you will grow to get apples, you need a second apple tree as a pollinator, and it needs to be a different tree. Get 2 apple trees and you'll get fruit on both those trees. Get 1 apple tree and you won't get fruit on that tree. It's that simple. There are many other fruit trees that follow that same model. They need pollinators. Now, when it comes time to buy your tree or order your tree, you'll often see that they're self-pollinating. And there are many trees out there. I grow some plum trees and I grow some peach trees that are self-pollinating. That's true. You can have a single tree and you will get fruit on that tree because it will pollinate itself. But if you get two trees, two different types of peaches or two different types of plums, you'll get more fruit because self-pollination works to a degree. Not every single flower is going to be pollinated. And some of those that are pollinate will self-prune. They'll fall off the plant. But if you have at least two different varieties, it tends to make it stronger and you'll have more fruit, not only from the original tree, but from the second tree as well. So start thinking about that as you are choosing your trees. It depends as well as to how close the trees are growing together. The closer you can have your trees, the more likely they're going to be pollinated. And trees that we're growing as fruit trees are not going to be wind pollinated. They need to be insect pollinated. So the trees need to be close enough together that the insects can bounce back and forth, fly back and forth from one tree to another. This also raises the issue that I'm always promoting, which is to grow a great variety of plants in your garden. So if you're going to grow fruit trees, well, then grow some pollinator plants as well. So have flowers around your fruit trees of all different types because the flowers will attract pollinators and then those insects will be right there under your fruit trees to now pop up and pollinate to get all the fruit that you're looking for. So pollination plays a much more important role with fruit trees than you might have known. Think about it, focus on it, and buy your trees specifically for pollination purposes, and you will have more success in that little small orchard that you're trying to grow. Be it just a couple trees or a whole bunch of trees, you really want to think about the pollination aspect. So wanted to throw that out there because this is the time of year you should start thinking about fruit trees. In the US in particular, and I think this holds true for the UK and Europe, the trees that you're going to be buying and ordering are going to be coming available from the nurseries in just another 2 months. And so some of these places you've got to get the trees ordered. One of our local nurseries has just started a program. For the first time, they're going to be selling bare root trees that you can order ahead of time. Normally you go to the nursery and you buy potted trees. Well, this nursery will be selling bare root trees, but you have to order your trees now. And they're not going to be delivered until March. And so basically you have to think 5 months ahead of time about what trees you want to be growing. And that holds true for a lot of other areas and a lot of nurseries because the trees often sell out pretty quickly. So be ready to order your trees in December or January, and you've got to start thinking about it now. And as you think about it now, you got to think about the pollinators. So hope that gets you moving forward and thinking about fruit trees. If you don't have fruit trees in your garden now, you should do it. You can grow dwarf trees that might only be 6 or 8 feet tall. You'll still get fruit. Doesn't take up a lot of space in your garden, but if you've got enough space for a 6 to 8 foot tall tree or two, I encourage that you do so. It's just a nice way to add variety to your garden, and it's also wonderful to go out and pick an apple off your tree while you're out working in the garden and eat it, or plum. I've had great success with plums here in Colorado, and same thing, to eat a fresh plum right off the tree. It just tastes so incredible. So awesome to do that. Let's see. So Chris is asking, how close to the trunk do I need to cut a branch to clone of a fruit tree? So when you prune your tree, and I'll be showing this when I do the pruning videos, but hopefully this will make sense and you can follow along. Between the trunk of the tree and the branch, where it joins, it's called the branch collar. And it's actually like a shirt collar. It goes around the branch of the tree and it's a little bit thicker than the branch. And it's right where the trunk connects. When you prune a tree, you want to prune right up to the branch collar, but you don't want to cut into the branch collar. So when you're pruning off branches, prune as close to the trunk as you can. Just don't cut into that little layer. And if you look closely, you'll be able to see it. You don't want to cut into that little layer that is the junction between the trunk and the branch. If you leave it intact, then it will heal and the tree will be fine. But if you cut into that branch collar, then the branch won't heal and it could cause future damage to the tree because it becomes a doorway for potential disease and pest problems. So whether you're planning to do grafting or just pruning, go ahead and think in terms of pruning right up to that point where you're just at the branch collar. Now, if you're grafting, you don't need a full branch. I would prune up to that point, but you can get multiple grafts from a single branch. As long as it's got buds on it that can grow, you can get multiple grafts from a single branch. A lot of it depends on the size of the branch and how you're going to root it, and then the potential growth for the future when it gets to the grafting point as well. But hope that helps as far as pruning and how far back you should do your pruning. Heidi says, never bury the graft. When planting, face the graft away from the sun. That's a good tip for fruit trees. Thanks. Let's see. Joe Black is saying, just never know how deep to take the soil for testing. Not much information on that. I actually have a couple of videos about soil testing, and I'm actually making another one using a different type of test. So I'd check out my video on how to do soil testing. I show exactly how to take samples, talk about the depth, talk about taking the different samples, mixing them together, and then sending them off to a lab. So check out my video on how to take samples for soil testing, and hopefully it'll answer your question. It's relatively in-depth. Okay, Debbie's saying, my neighbor has a plum tree. If I purchased one plum tree, would they cross-pollinate? Yeah, very possibly. As long as they're close enough together. Generally speaking, it's recommended that the trees should be no more than 50 feet apart. That's just to ensure the maximum coverage by pollinators, so they'll go from one tree to another. You'll get pollination if they're more than 50 feet apart. You just might not get as much pollination. But if your neighbor has a tree that is within that 50-foot range of where you're planning on putting a tree, absolutely. You're using their tree as that second tree that you need for pollination. So good point. I should have probably thought about that earlier. If you don't have space for multiple trees, but your neighbors have trees, absolutely. Your neighbor's trees are just as good at pollinating as the trees you put into your own landscape. That's a good one. Okay, let's see what Katie says. You mentioned doing well with plums in Colorado. What other fruit trees would you recommend for dry, high altitude locations with cold winters like Utah and Colorado? So last week, and you can go back and watch that. Last week I talked a little bit about chill hours. So you do need to select trees that require chill hours because that's what does best in our environment. So I've had the best success with apples and plums. I've had good success with apricots and peaches. So most stone fruits do pretty well. The issue that I have in my specific region is inevitably we have late spring frosts and freezes. And so it's not unusual for our stone fruits in particular to be in blossom when one of those freezes hits. So while the trees grow great and you get blossoms, it's about a 25% probability that you're going to get fruit in the past. About 3 out of 4 years, I always seemed to get a freeze that would kill the blossoms and I would get no fruit that year. But in that good year, had great success with fruit. So a lot depends on how late you get your freezes, but stone fruits do well, pears do pretty well, cherries, sour cherry trees do pretty well. I haven't had much success with sweet cherry trees, but those are the ones that I would focus on that are probably going to do best in a high altitude, dry, and cold environment like we have in Colorado and northern New Mexico and Utah and Wyoming. Those are, I think, the trees you'll see most of the gardeners growing. Nachi G, also from Colorado. Thank you so much for that contribution, that super chat. I really do appreciate that. Okay, so good to see all the contributions of comments as well. Lots of activity from people that aren't as often here and aren't as talkative. So it's so great to see it. I just love it. And feel free to join in. I said this earlier, but I'm one of those people. I fully get it. I watch about 2 or 3 different live chats of different channels each week, and I almost never make a comment. I'm just not a comment when someone else is talking kind of guy. But I often think I should. And afterwards I'll think, man, I should have asked that question I was thinking about. Don't worry about it on this channel. We're all friendly and nice. And if you're thinking about a question, go ahead and throw it out. Even if you're like me, where you just like to hang back and watch and get the information, it would be nice to see your question. If it's on your mind, go ahead and throw it out there. Okay, I also wanted to talk this week about developing a gardening world, and it kind of ties into that thought. And so I'm throwing this out as trying to develop a gardening world. And what I really mean by that is, particularly over the holidays, it's a good opportunity, but find other people in your world who are gardeners or want to be gardeners. And this is one of those things that it grows. So if you are gardening by yourself right now, you're probably loving it, but there are things you'd like to share. You'd like to tell people about. There's questions you'd like to have answered. You'd like to have someone like me or the other great people in this community helping you along and answering your question. Every community has people like that. Now, I'm a member of a local gardening club, even though we haven't had any meetings for the last 9 months, and we're probably not going to have any meetings for the next 6 months, but we still have a gardening club. We still communicate on Facebook. We still occasionally send email messages out. That's one way for you to expand your gardening world within your own community. See if there is a Facebook forum, if there's a library group, if there's a garden club that you might be able to join, just so you can share your gardening time and your gardening journey with other gardeners. Because as you've all already found out in this community, it's a lot of fun to have a conversation with someone from halfway around the world that has the exact same issue as you. It's also great fun to have that conversation with somebody that lives one street over that you didn't even know they were a gardener. But by reaching out a little bit and getting involved, you might really create a new and lifelong friendship with another gardener by just talking about gardening. You know, talking about Tony O'Neill and Simplified gardening. Yeah, we know each other from doing a video. We chat back and forth. We'll send an email back and forth. I look forward to the time that I can visit England and go to Tony's garden. May never happen, but at least we're gardeners on the same journey, and it might happen. Well, that's one of those things I look forward to. Well, why shouldn't I also look forward to the opportunity to see other gardeners in other situations? At the beginning, I talked about going and collecting leaves and meeting Frank Frank's a viewer, never met him before. We've talked on the phone. We're setting up this opportunity for me to get some leaves next week. Hopefully it'll happen. There's snow in the forecast. It might not happen. But that's what I'm talking about, expanding your gardening community so we can share what we're doing and ask questions and get questions answered. Now, I typically am the one answering the questions. I'm okay with that. When I get into a group like a garden club, people are asking me questions almost all the time. But there's a lot that I don't know about gardening. And that might surprise you, but it's incredible. The more I learn about gardening, the more I learn that there's a lot I don't know about gardening. And this really, really hit me in the head with a shovel years ago when I applied to be the head gardener for the school, the Galileo Garden Project. Big project, huge space. You can see it in some of my early videos. And I was a master gardener. I'd been teaching gardening for years, and I applied to become the gardener at this school that had about 1,000 students. And it was going to be an incredible program. I knew I was the most qualified applicant because I knew so much about gardening because I was teaching all these gardening classes. And then I got the job and I started building this garden and I started working with students. And within a month, I was humbled like you would not believe because I found out very quickly that I didn't know a fraction of what I needed to know to teach 10 and 11-year-old children how to garden. And then the more that I built the garden and I started expanding it and adding beds and adding structures, well, now you got to put plants in. And I realized how little I knew about plants other than the handful of plants that I'd been growing in my home garden for years, the same plants that everybody asks questions about. But when you create a garden that is 26,000 square feet, as I was doing, well, the whole garden can't be tomatoes and peppers. There's got to be a lot more to it. I learned that I didn't know all of that. And that really generated in me the recognition that there's a lot more out there that I have no exposure to. So at the school garden, I started expanding my network. I was growing in a 42-foot dome greenhouse for the first time. So I found out who has a 42-foot dome greenhouse in my area. And I made friends with those gardeners. And I found out that most of them really didn't know what they were doing in their dome greenhouse. So we started getting together and sharing our ideas and sharing our experiences. And all of us became better just because we expanded our gardening world beyond what we were doing in our own space. When I started that network, that led to more networks because they know people. And I started getting exposed to classes and organizations that were based out of our local university. And that was wonderful to start meeting other gardeners, other garden greenhouse managers, nutritionists, and realizing a whole new world of gardening, not just growing and harvesting and using in my own kitchen, but how I could teach and expand that knowledge base to people who didn't know how to harvest and use in their kitchen. So sure, I'm approaching it from an educator's perspective, but it also holds true from just a gardener in the backyard. In my gardening club, I was exposed to people that were growing flowers that I'd never grown before. I didn't even know you could grow some of that stuff here in Colorado. So they were more than happy to share seeds with me. And now I'm starting to grow things from seeds that were given to me by new gardener friends from the gardening club. Plants I would have never thought about, but they've been doing it for years. So think about these kind of things, how you can expand your gardening world. With just one person, you will double the experience that you have with gardening because you now have all of their experiences to learn from. And now you add 2 more people and you've doubled that, because you can now focus on their experiences that you can learn from. And you get to learn more because as you share your experiences, you realize, oh yeah, I didn't even know I knew that. And it gives you that prompt to learn more. And then it's just the camaraderie. I have a couple family members that are gardeners of different levels, and it's nice when you get together over the holidays and you're sipping on that nice little hot drink in front of the fire and you talk gardening. I was talking about earlier, where you spend this holiday time and you stay immersed in gardening in one way or another. Well, if you've got a world that includes other gardeners, it becomes so much easier during the holidays because you can talk about gardening. Yeah, there's lots of other things to talk about. You can talk about turkey and football, but that only goes so far. Why not throw a little gardening into the mix with the family members who are gardeners? And within my family, I'm the one that helped grow some of those gardeners because I talked about gardening at previous family events and then got them motivated. And before you know it, we're talking gardening. All of the mint that I'm growing in my garden, I got from one of those family members. She's been growing mint for years. I needed some. I dug up a bunch of her mint, put it in my garden, and we've shared that between us. And I've shared things with her as well. So just keep expanding your world as it comes to gardening. Find those other gardeners, create those other gardeners. And it's one of those things that if you think about it, where your world starts overlapping with another gardener's, and that gardener's world starts overlapping with another gardener's world, just like this live stream, just like this chat with hundreds of people from all over the world, all of our worlds are connected. We're all gardeners from different places, but all of our worlds are connected because we have this same idea that we like gardening and we want to learn more. So I wanted to throw that out at you today as a little bit of my philosophy moving forward. I'm always looking to expand my gardening world, and you are definitely a part of it. Because even though I haven't seen personally any of you, I'm more and more considering you to be friends because you're here every Monday, you're active, you're involved, we're talking back and forth. We're great gardening friends. You've seen me, I've never seen you, but that's okay because our worlds are connected. We are part of the same gardening world. And as we move into next year, which will hopefully be a much better year than this year, think about that. A year from now, as you look back, wouldn't it be great if you can think about all of those new friendships, all those new connections, all that great addition to your gardening world? That's the way I approach it. So next year, my gardening world's going to be bigger, and the year after that, even bigger still. And I know you play a big role in that in my gardening world, and I hope I play a role with your gardening world as well. Start looking for those others who are looking for a world, and you can help be part of it. I think that's just a great feeling when you can share and be part of a world. So, yeah, Tamara says buddies. That's exactly it. And I often refer to garden buddies, and so many of those are people I've never even met before, but we are definitely buddies. Okay. Let's see what else we have just to close it up. Yeah, Heidi, thanks. It has been another great live. Joe says, most people throw their black gold away. Check your neighbors with layaways and trees. I think I talked about this last week, and I know this. You said this is your first time live, Joe. Last week I talked about this as far as great time of year for those of us in the Northern Hemisphere. I'm doing this with my daughter here in just a couple of days, collecting leaves from other people's yards. So as people are cleaning up their gardens in fall, collect all their throwaway material. It really is black gold. If you can compost somebody else's material, yeah, that's a great way to expand your world and their world as well. You get to use their organic material in your garden, and you're really benefiting from it. So go out there, collect all of that stuff. It's the kind of thing that I've had that happen for. I actually had a neighbor years ago that I went up to them and asked if I could collect their leaves. And they're like, what? Who are you? Why do you want my leaves? And I told them that I'm a gardener and I use the leaves as mulch and I save them over the winter to use again in the spring. And it generated a conversation. And that conversation led to them starting a garden the next year. They'd never thought about gardening. Now, I never got their leaves again because they started using their own leaves in their garden, but I think that's a much better thing. I'd rather have someone collect their own leaves and use them in their garden than me collect their leaves because they're not a gardener. So go ahead and collect leaves. You may just go ahead and expand your gardening world in that way as well. How incredible is that? Okay, it's always such a wonderful time to get together on these Mondays. I am planning, since I'm encouraging you to stay active in gardening over the holidays, I am planning on doing this live stream all through the holidays. Next Monday, I will actually have my family here. My son and his family are traveling in for some time, and we'll see. I might even put my grandson on camera just for a couple minutes just to brag about him because he's, of course, the most beautiful baby in the world. But the following week, I'll be live as well. Moving into the Christmas and New Year time, I'll be live on Mondays as well. So I'm going to go ahead and talk the talk and walk the walk and try to get you thinking the same through the holidays. I'll be here passing out information. I hope you'll be here through all these Mondays as well, asking your questions, sharing your information as well. And then when we get to January and a new year starts, it'll be a whole new year with a whole lot of new gardening adventures. And we can all go through it together, starting with Monday and starting with your gardening week. So good to have you here. Thanks so much for participating. I'll be back next week. Hope to see you here next week as well. As always, I'm Gardener Scott. Enjoy gardening.